But as we go on through the message, we'll learn what it means and more things about it. So I think a key phrase we can take from all of these three messages that we're going to do is we aren't meant to be islands. That specifically applies to Aloof, but I can see it kind of bleeding into the other messages, and you'll see as we go through them. But we aren't meant to be islands. So before anything, I want to open up with Genesis 2:18. If you guys can pull that up. I didn't give them any verses, so it's going to be kind of interesting. Genesis 2:18. And my bad. Yeah, perfect, NLT. Nice. Okay, so you guys already know. So let's go ahead and read this quick verse. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him." So very standard verse, going back to Genesis, the beginning of time. And the reason why I want to open with this verse is because a lot of people think it only applies to marriage, to that sort of relationship. But in fact, it applies to any type of relationship, friendship, and many other sorts of relationships. And without meaningful relationships, we feel empty. We're meant to have other people there. In fact, that's, we have a relationship with Jesus. He's filling that void, right? In studying Jesus' life, we also find that he was sociable. So for that, we can reference the wedding feast. He went to a lot of places. He met a lot of people. So he was a very sociable person. Very much the contrary to what I'm going to tell you what aloof means. It's clearly God's divine plan that we connect with each other. But this is the key, in a mutually beneficial, satisfying, and productive way. I'm not going to go into these three adjectives because we've already kind of covered them in previous topics. For example, the toxic friendships. How to identify a mutually beneficial relationship, satisfying something that satisfies you, but also you need to ensure that you satisfy the person that you're being friends with in a productive way. What is it that you're doing with your relationship? Is it ironing? Is it iron sharpening iron? So it's our responsibility to take initiative in connecting with others. And that's sometimes might be a little hard to swallow, especially with what I'm going to say afterwards. But I want to go really quick to Proverbs 18:24, and it's a good thing you guys did it with NLT because it has a really nice, it rolls off the tongue with 18:24. So there are friends, in commas, who destroy each other, but a real friend sticks closer than a brother, and that's mutual. I'm kind of piggybacking into the idea of the toxic friendships, and I don't want to cover that too much because we've already covered it before, but those are God's requisites. So God's requisites for our life is that we establish relationships with others, that we establish friendships, and that we iron sharpens iron. And I'm going back to that phrase again. But what exactly is it that we're talking about today? What is aloof? What does it have to do with anything? Well, the definition of aloof is not friendly or forthcoming, cool and distant. Another definition I kind of enjoyed or I kind of liked was removed or distanced physically and emotionally. Synonyms of aloof, for if you're still a little confused at what it could mean, is distant, detached, cold, unsympathetic, unapproachable, and standoffish. So I'm pretty sure we might have run into people like that in our lives, or maybe you're reflecting with yourself right now and you're identifying yourself as having some of these characters or these traits. An aloof attitude is detrimental to both a personal and professional life. And here I want to give a very brief testimony. Where I work, we usually have a lot of students coming in, and a lot of those students aren't familiar with how to use certain machines or things like that. And if you have we've had people in the past who have shown the students very impatiently in the wrong way how to do certain things. And because of that, the students grow very anxious and don't want to come back to the shop. And I've already heard from the club I was a part of, a lot of people that didn't want to go to the shop because they were nervous of coming back and people not treating them, with that warm welcome. But treating them with that warm welcome and and being patient with them, not being aloof, motivates them to come back and actually promotes the function of the shop, which is to help students do their projects. Another more probably tangible example is going to a store, and this is an example that she uses in the book, is when you go to the store and you get a very cold clerk, you usually don't want to go back to that store. I mean, probably if it's the only store and it's the cheapest thing, like the 99 or something like that, you got no choice. But if it's like Smart and Finals or something like that, you can get someone cold and there's another store like next to it, you kind of feel a little standoffish of coming back, and that can affect your professional life. It can break relationships, and also with it, a lot of opportunities can be missed. And of course, personal. When you're aloof, people are judging you. And this is important because judgment can affect others' behaviors around you, and more importantly, it can multiply the aloof character in others. So I think something that we're seeing a lot in this day and age, and I don't want to talk so much about modern culture, but something we're seeing a lot in this day and age is a lot of individualism. And that kind of strays away, or it strays away from the biblical standard of what God wants us to do. God wants us to be brotherly to each other, and he wants us to establish those relationships, and he wants us to be not codependent on each other, but he wants us to, have those partners so that we can relate and have something tangible there. Of course, Jesus is supposed to fill that hole, which we're going to talk about now, which is a source of that aloof attitude. But it's important to understand that we still do need those tangible relationships in our lives. Otherwise, we can grow very cold in other aspects of our lives. So that's the what. What is aloof? So when you're aloof, people are trying to judge you. So now we're going to go into the why. Actually, before we do that, I wanted to mention something else, specifically about aloofness. So a lot of people misunderstand aloofness as being bipolarity. Bipolarity and aloofness, I consider them completely different. First of all, bipolarity is an actual medical condition. Now, a lot of people say I'm bipolar or something like that. Sometimes they come in happy or not. I would say that's more you're susceptible to your environment a little bit more. As far as aloofness, I wouldn't say that's aloofness. As well, I'd say in the Bible, in fact, aloofness is also mentioned in a few places. First, we have Peter with the Gentiles. It's a weird mention of aloofness, but Peter and the Gentiles, Peter doesn't want to talk to the Gentiles, and then Paul reprimands him about that. And Peter doesn't want to talk to the Gentiles because they're Gentiles, So he's kind of in that way. And you might not think that's aloofness. It's a different root for the aloofness, but he's still showing the characteristics of aloofness. He's still distancing from other people, although the reasons might be different. Another example we have are the Pharisees. The Pharisees were also aloof. They distanced themselves from the general population of the Jews, and they were separatists in that sense, and they thought they were better than everyone. That's another example of aloofness. So why? Why are people aloof? Why is it that people have this inclination to be individualistic? Why do we want to be by ourselves? I can do it. I don't need anyone else to be in my life. I would ask yourself these following questions. What were you trying to avoid or protect yourself from? And what messages were you sending that you don't have the courage to say with words? And that one really hurts. What messages were you sending that you don't have the courage to say with words? So the truth is, aloofness is a learned behavior from childhood. Yes, it's a learned behavior from childhood. And there are a lot of sources in which you can attain this aloof character. For one, we have negativity from family, unwise school teachers, or mean classmates. Or another one is moving frequently from schools or cities, abandonment, cold or emotionally detached parents, bullying, being teased, or ridiculed. And all of these connect and say the same thing. They spell that connecting with people is painful. A lot of people, it's the lack of vulnerability. You don't want to be vulnerable because you feel that the next time you open up with someone, they're just going to fly away and take all of your worries with them. Aloofness is a byproduct, is kind of what I like to call it. It's a byproduct. It's something you exhibit because of an initial reaction. And that reaction can be distrust because of something that occurred previously in your life. And one that wasn't really mentioned in the book is a condescending or prideful attitude. That's one we're going to talk about in the following few weeks. But that one is particularly dangerous because whereas in the other ones you're more vulnerable and cautious, with a prideful attitude, you have more of a risk of spreading that type of attitude to other people. It's very dangerous. But to shift from the aloof attitude, you need to ensure that you open up to safe people. That's kind of why we have these events here, or we have Push and we have the youth. It's meant so that you can open up to people in the youth. I know it's a little hard sometimes to be vulnerable, and it takes time. I remember for me, it took a while, and in some sense, I'm still going through the process of opening myself up. But it's important for you to acknowledge that there are people here in the youth, here at the church, that want to listen to you and listen to your problems, and they want to help you with that. Another important thing that I wanted to cover, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, so I do apologize. Was trying something new here, but I don't know how well it's working. But the other thing I want to cover is, how do you defeat this attitude? How do you defeat it? Obviously, we came here not to learn about the definition of aloofness. We came here to identify how we can demolish this attitude, or how we can take it out of our lives. And the first thing you need to do is identify the root. Like anything, you need to identify the root of the aloofness. It might be pride, as it might be hurt from previous relationships. And those are all the only two I'm focusing on. There are a lot of other reasons you can be aloof. But if it's a matter of pride, you need to identify and make sure that you're acknowledging that Christ is the reason you're able to accomplish everything you do. It's something simple, but it's hard to swallow sometimes. So just acknowledge that Christ is the only reason you're able to do anything, and that it's only through the will of God that you do the things that you do. No matter your successes, no matter anything you do, it's all through God. And sometimes it's hard, I'm saying it again, but sometimes it's really hard to swallow that idea. So, and then as far as a lack of vulnerability to people, that's where she comes in and she talks about a little bit more. You need to ensure that you open up to the correct people. Again, you need to open up to people at church, I would say open up to people that are constant at church, at least. Also, another thing that's kind of important is committing and resolving yourself to change your aloof attitude isn't enough. It's not enough to resolve yourself to change. I can attest to this as well as many others, I'm sure, but just saying that you're going to change your way of being and you're going to be friendly 2 weeks maybe, and then you'll resort back to your usual self. It's not enough. What you need to do is you need to ask for God's help, and you need to depend on His truth and His word. And that's where reading the word is really important, because oftentimes we know the truth. I mean, the truth is pretty straightforward, right? But reading the word acts as a reminder, because it's not, I don't necessarily think it's a mental battle. Yes, it is a mental battle, but it's an emotional battle as well. Because, sometimes you're sad and you're down and you feel like no one wants to talk to you and something like that. Maybe because you look through your messages and you don't see anything or whatever it is. But you need to remember that there is someone that's thinking about you consistently, and that's Jesus Christ. And that's God, your Father. And it's kind of hard to swallow that because it's something not tangible. But again, we're going back to the idea you need to have that person there, something tangible, so that you can relay those concerns and those and have a relationship with. Okay. So once you sought God's help, through the Bible and consulting with the Bible and applying the many lessons of the Bible, who are the appropriate people to talk to, and that kind of goes into the other topics we've talked about, as specifically the toxic friends again. But once you've sought God's help, you need to join a small youth group, which is what we're doing now. And emphasis on the small. This was something that I was hearing a lot from this week and last. I was hearing from, well, actually in general, but what's that pastor's name? Rick Warren. Yeah, Rick Warren always says that. He's always highlighting small groups, and the reason why is because within small groups, there's a stronger connection between each other. There's more accountability, intimacy. That's the word. In a bigger group, in a bigger setting, yes, there is some form of intimacy, but as you guys can see after service, there's usually these little smaller groups within the youth group. And that's really good to have in the youth because that allows intimacy and accountability, closer accountability amongst those groups. So again, once you've sought God's help, join a small group. And also, it might be a good idea to join some coworkers for lunch. It's a weird thing, but also consider branching out and not being aloof in your other areas of life. It doesn't mean you're going to be aloof. You're not going to be aloof now at church, but somewhere else, you're still going to be aloof. You stop being aloof altogether and you start branching out and establishing relationships because maybe other people have those hurts and have those distrusts. And believe me, they do. A lot of people do have those distrusts and don't want to open up. But by you being there and by you showing your support and care, you might also establish a relationship with someone that has that behavior and therefore multiply a correct attitude. Also, be ready for a long battle. It's fighting the aloof attitude or fighting being distant with other people isn't something easy to do, by no means. It's going to be a long battle. There's going to be days when you're not going to want to talk to anyone, or there's going to be days when you feel very strong emotions, let's just say it like that. But in those days, you need to get on your knees and pray to God for strength. If you feel like you're going to do something or you're going to behave in the incorrect way, do preventative action, Don't distance yourself completely, but maybe distance yourself a little bit if you feel like you're not in a good situation at the moment. And also, it's kind of important for you to acknowledge that you will be hurt, but don't isolate. The isolation is the thing that you have to fight consistently. So don't isolate. A few more things. I'm almost done. It's really short, I know, my bad. But something else that I want to open or I want to go into is, I actually want to go into a little bit more to the stories that I was or the examples that I was giving to you. The one regarding the Pharisees, Jesus eating with the sinners and the tax collectors, and then Peter belittling the Gentiles. I want to just bring it up so that way you can have some scriptural reference to where aloofness is mentioned biblically. So the first one is going to be Matthew 9, 10 through 11. Very short. Just going to go through these passages a little quick, and then we'll be done with it. Okay. So later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum? Actually, let's go to the next verse. I know I said 11, so my bad, but I want to actually read this to fruition because I want to see what Jesus says. When Jesus heard this, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. Another reason why we need to combat the aloof attitude, because oftentimes we might have a lot of good within us, but we're not spreading that to others. But of course, that's an example of the Pharisees being aloof. Then we have the last one, and then we'll be done. Galatians 2, 11 through 13. Galatians 2, 11 through 13. Thanks. But when Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised. But after, when some friends of James came, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of the criticism from these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. As a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. So another reason we need to ensure that we don't distance ourselves from people simply because of a prideful origin. And well, with that, I suppose I'll conclude. Before I conclude, I suppose I want to say that I'm still finding my way through this specific topic. It was a tough one to swallow just because I don't know. It was a tough one to swallow for me. I know it seems kind of odd because I'm saying it to you guys and I already have an outline, but this one is still a topic that I think I'm still am dealing with. So it was a little odd to cover it. But what I do want to say before I end is that with things like this, we need to depend full-heartedly on God's strength and power. The origin for these things, whatever it may be, it's important to identify it, deal with the root, and take that root out, and then from there, establish relationships accordingly. But with that, I'll end. So thank you.